Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Beatle Bandit, a serial bank robber's deadly heist, a cross-country manhunt, and the insanity plea that shook the nation. By Nate Hendley. Narrated by David Marantz. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you may hear references to visual elements present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Introduction. This book is about Matthew Kerry Smith, who robbed a series of banks in southern Ontario between 1960 and 1964. Most notably, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce in North York on July 24, 1964. On this occasion, Smith shot and killed a bank customer named Jack Blank who tried to intervene. Smith's actions would have far-reaching effects and inflame a national debate about gun control, the insanity defense, and especially the death penalty in Canada. His crimes were particularly shocking given that Canada prided itself on being a peaceful society at the time with a low crime rate. Gunfights on the street with military-grade weapons happened in Chicago, not Canada. The 1961 census counted 18.24 million Canadians. Of these, 1.8 million people lived in the metropolitan Toronto area, making it the second-largest urban center in the country after Montreal. Metro Toronto was not a particularly diverse place. Over 1 million residents responding to the 1961 census cited the British Isles as their homeland. Most of the remaining residents of metropolitan Toronto came from continental Europe. Protestants represented the majority faith in Metro Toronto, and there were few people of color, although the 1961 census did list 20,534 residents under the category Asiatic. At the time, North York was an independent municipality with a population of 269,959 and its own mayor. In the summer of 1964, Philip Givens was mayor of Toronto. He presided over a rapidly growing city that had to deal with multiple issues. The day Smith conducted his raid on the Imperial Bank, the Toronto Daily Star reported on a meeting of municipal officials to discuss a proposed apartment development with local homeowners. The meeting quickly degenerated into a general beefing session against the city, reported the Star. Homeowners raised angry questions about taxes, the high cost of snow removal, and noise from subway construction, among other topics. Then as now, Toronto was considered a safe place. Even in 2020, there were only 71 homicides in the city of Toronto, down from 79 the year before, a remarkably low figure for a megacity where nearly 3 million people currently live. In the 1960s, violent crime was even less common. Toronto had its share of headline-grabbing criminals, such as the bank-robbing Boyd gang of the early 1950s, but the city was generally peaceful. So, too, was the entire country, for that matter. In 1964, there were 253 homicides recorded in Canada, 81 of which took place in Ontario. That same year, Canadian courts handed down 5 death sentences. While no one had been executed since late 1962 when Ronald Turpin and Arthur Lucas were hanged at Toronto's Don Jail, capital punishment was still on the books. If Canadian crime rates were low, violence and armed robbery were not completely unknown. On July 24, 1964, the front page of the Toronto Daily Star carried a story about a bank robbery in small-town Cobden, Ontario. During a hold-up at a Bank of Nova Scotia branch, a pair of robbers shot and wounded a bank accountant. A teller was held hostage, and 2 suspects were arrested in a stolen vehicle at the west gate of Algonquin Park. The same edition offered a glimpse at the entertainment options available to Torontonians in the summer of 1964. There were advertisements for an upcoming Louis Armstrong concert and the musical Camelot. A small notice listed a show by then-unknown Levon Helm before his fame with the band. The big movies in town included Robin and the Seven Hoods, a clownish affair featuring Frank Sinatra's Rat Pack, Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, and Zulu, featuring an up-and-coming British actor named Michael Caine. As for more downscale entertainment, a Toronto theater offered an adults-only flick called The Doctor and the Playgirls, supposedly based on the Profumo Keeler Dr. Ward scandal, as the ad copy put it. Said scandal involved sex, prostitutes, and British high society. The same theater promised a demonstration of the latest in beach fashions, including the new and unique topless bathing suits modeled by the world's most beautiful women. On a similar note, Toronto's Victory Burlesque Theater was hosting a performance by Kim Soo Lee, Sexotic Queen of the Orient. An advertisement assured attendees they could enjoy a great stage and screen show in cool, air-conditioned comfort. During the summer of 1964, Toronto residents could look forward to exciting hockey action once the new season commenced. That spring, the Toronto Maple Leafs had stomped the Detroit Red Wings 4-0 in the 7th game of the finals to win their 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup. The Leafs were helmed by legendary coach George Punch Imlach and featured stars such as Frank Mahovlich, Johnny Bower, and Tim Horton, whose name is now associated with the nationwide donut and coffee chain he co-founded. Anyone who followed hockey in 1964 could be forgiven for assuming the Leafs were unbeatable. South of the border, the United States was convulsed by the civil rights movement and growing unrest in African American communities. The July 24, 1964 edition of the Star contained the headline, "Barry Johnson to Meet on Civil Rights," referencing pro-civil rights President Lyndon Johnson and Republican Party nominee Barry Goldwater. The same page featured a photograph of a young Negro, as the cut line called him, arrested for suspected vandalism in Brooklyn. In Canada, things were considerably more mundane. Lester Pearson was Prime Minister, and the Liberal Party ran the government. The big issue of the day was, should Canada have a new flag, and if yes, what should it look like? In 1964, Canada waved an emblem featuring a modified Union Jack called the Canadian Red Ensign. Rancorous debate about the state of Canada's flag kicked off in the House of Commons in June 1964. The new flag, featuring a red maple leaf against a white background, bracketed by red bars, would be unveiled in early 1965. The other earth-shattering news in Canada in 1964 was the arrival of a musical quartet from Liverpool called the Beatles. Like most Western nations at the time, Canada was swept up in Beatlemania as the Fab Four repeatedly topped the charts. Toronto teams dreamed about seeing the Beatles perform live at a pair of shows scheduled for the Maple Leaf Gardens hockey arena that September. The Beatles would return to perform in Toronto in 1965 and 1966, but their initial appearances sparked by far the largest frenzy. Big Toronto radio stations such as Chum and CKEY kept watch over this mayhem, encouraging it at times. The stations were rivals and tried to outdo each other with wild promotional stunts. The CKEY crew referred to themselves as the Good Guys. Matthew Kerry Smith would take note of the impacts of both the Beatles and radio station CKEY during his violent robbery of the Imperial Bank. This crime would have national repercussions and be a personal tragedy for Smith's victims and his family alike. Note: most of the events in this book occurred before Canada converted to the metric system. Media articles and official documentation cited use imperial measurements, pounds, feet, yards, etc. To avoid confusion, I have primarily used imperial measurements throughout the text to present a consistent narrative. Note 2. There are no imagined conversations in this book. All comments, conversations, and dialogue are based on court transcripts, interviews, newspaper articles, police documents, etc. In general, quotes from interviews are in present tense, while quotes from other sources are in past tense. All sources are cited in the bibliography. Chapter 1. Bullets, Banks, and Beetlewigs. On the afternoon of July 24, 1964, Matthew Kerry Smith drove to the intersection of North York's Overbrook Place and Elder Street in a modified Ford Galaxy that contained guns, a wig, and a guitar case, among other items. He parked and began to prepare for the armed robbery he'd been planning. It was Friday, and the weather was sunny and hot. Smith's target, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce at nearby Bathurst Manor Plaza, was dealing with the last customers of the day. The intelligent but troubled son of a successful businessman and mentally ill mother, 24-year-old Smith had more than just money on his mind. He harbored dreams of a revolution and viewed bank robbery as a means of financing it. Smith had previously robbed 2 other banks at gunpoint and seized thousands of dollars. He had tried and failed to steal weapons from an armory and been jailed for leading police on a wild car chase. Prior to these criminal exploits, Smith served in the Royal Canadian Navy, RCN. Still in his car, Smith was clad in a white T-shirt bearing the slogan, CKEY Good Guys, referring to the local radio station. He ducked beneath the dashboard and put on his disguise, which consisted of a Halloween mask depicting the face of French President Charles de Gaulle, sunglasses, and a long-haired Beatle wig. The Fab Four from England were all the rage, and Toronto retailers had started selling wigs modeled after the band's shaggy locks. A few months earlier, Harold Ballard, president of Maple Leaf Gardens, had donned one of these wigs to greet fans lined up to buy tickets for that first pair of Beatles concerts. On March 23, 1964, the Beatles had 6 songs in CKEY rival Chum's Hit Parade Top 10, although the day of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, CIBC robbery, the number 1 song at Chum was Memphis by Johnny Rivers, a brief hiatus from the Beatles' onslaught. Smith was heavily armed. His main weapon of choice was an air-cooled, gas-powered Fabrique Nationale FN 308 7.62 mm semi-automatic rifle. For backup, Smith packed a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol in a belt holster. Dubbed the quintessential battle rifle, the long, lethal FN was developed in Belgium and used by soldiers around the world. The Canadian Army was equipped with a licensed, made-in-Ontario version of the FN rifle called the C1. It was the type of firearm to give you pause, even if Smith had painted the barrel of his weapon pink. The rest of his rifle was black. There was some logic behind Smith's choice of color. He intended to approach the bank on foot, hiding his rifle in a guitar case. Unfortunately, the rifle was longer than the guitar case. So, prior to the heist, Smith had drilled a hole in one end of the guitar case large enough for the rifle barrel. Smith now placed the FN rifle inside the case, carefully poking the pink barrel through the hole. He snapped the guitar case shut and exited his car. Anyone who glanced his way would see a guitar case with a pink metallic object sticking out of it and never guess it was part of a rifle. Smith got out of the Ford Galaxy holding his guitar case and a pair of canvas haversacks. In his odd attire, he walked the short distance to the bank. Bathurst Manor Plaza was on Wilmington Avenue, which ran north-south. The CIBC branch was at 221 Wilmington, next to Overbrook, which ran east-west. Also called the Wilmington Plaza, the shopping center consisted of a nondescript cluster of retail and service outlets facing a parking lot. A few people on the street gaped as the tall, lanky young man passed by. To make it look like he was a harmless goofball, Smith affected a casual, bantering manner, calling out, "Hi, cats," to a group of young people hanging around the parking lot. Guitar case in hand, Smith walked through the parking lot and toward the CIBC branch. The bank had a vestibule and double doors. An exterior sign above an awning announced the presence of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce in bold capital letters. Big windows along the south wall offered a view of the outside. Inside the bank, 24-year-old accountant Carmen Lamb was fetching American currency for a customer. He looked out the window and saw Smith heading toward the bank. Taking note of the stranger's appearance, Lamb turned to a colleague and joshed, "There goes your brother." Lamb went back to his tasks as Smith stepped inside. It was roughly 5:05 p.m. Smith's attire instantly drew the attention of the roughly 24 customers in the bank. Some thought he was pulling a prank. Sally Blank, who was in the bank with her husband Jack, would later tell a courtroom that Smith looked like a clown. At 54 years old, Jack Blank was short and muscular, with dark hair, a mustache, and a soldierly bearing. He worked as a furrier, a maker of fur garments, and was a veteran of both the Canadian Army and the Haganah, a predecessor of the Israel Defense Forces. Jack and Sally Blank had 2 children, daughter Diane, in her mid-20s, and son Stanley, 14, who went by the nickname Butch. The Blank family, save for Diane, who resided elsewhere, lived in an apartment building at 242 Wilmington Avenue. Their unit overlooked Bathurst Manor Plaza. That Sunday, the family was intending to go on vacation. My husband and I went in to open a joint bank account for our holidays so that we would know exactly how much money we were spending and there wouldn't be any complications financially. We were both quite happy. We were going on a holiday to the States with our son. Sally Blank later recounted on an episode of the CBC TV program Toronto File. "We were supposed to go to Kingston first because I wanted to see Fort Henry and then go back to Windsor and go to Detroit to see my father's younger brother," recalls Stanley today. Some bank customers recognized the CKEY name on Smith's T-shirt and wondered if he was taking part in a publicity stunt. These thoughts ended when Smith opened the guitar case and took out the FN rifle with the pink barrel. He held the rifle in his right hand with the stock resting on his hip, the pair of canvas haversacks in his left hand. Smith stepped to the northwest corner of the bank to the office of manager Henry Martins. Martins was inside chatting with salesman Hartley Lepofsky when Smith kicked the door open. The men looked up in surprise at this outlandish character in the doorway. Martins noticed the barrel of the weapon pointed at him was pink, and briefly wondered if it was a toy gun. He was dressed in cartoon fashion, like a comedian of some sort. He ordered us behind the cages, which I did not understand what he meant. He followed with another instruction to move, and we both just sat there looking at him, thinking it was a practical joke or something at the beginning, Lepofsky later testified. What Smith had to say, however, was anything but funny. "This is a hold-up. I want all the money," shouted Smith. Martins didn't react right away. "I don't think this is very funny," huffed the bank manager. To show he meant business, Smith fired a shot a few feet above Martin's head. The bullet blasted a hole in the wall measuring 1 inch in diameter and 1.5 inches deep. When I saw the hole in the wall, I knew this could be no joke, and the noise itself had brought me back to reality, stated Lepofsky. At the front of the bank, Lamb was stunned by the sound. "I don't know if you've ever heard a 308 in a closed space," he says today. Patrons and staff alike froze in place. "Get moving! I mean business," snarled Smith behind the mask and shades. With the FN rifle pointed at them, Martins and Lepofsky scurried out of the office. They headed behind the bank counters as staff and customers milled about in shock. Lamb also noticed that the barrel of Smith's weapon was painted pink. The rifle was metal rather than nice wood stock, and about 4 inches of pink barrel were sticking out of the end. I'm sure I thought, "That's different," but I wasn't giving it that much thought because we're in the middle of a hold-up, recalls the accountant. Witnesses also took note of Smith's headgear. Even people who might not otherwise be fans recognized the Beatle wig. The Beatles were everywhere that year, their pudding bowl haircuts an endless source of media fascination. Smith tossed the canvas haversacks over the bank counter. Then he pressed his left palm against the smooth surface of the counter and leapt over it, tucking his FN rifle under his right arm and hip as he vaulted. Smith stood on top of Lamb's desk and shouted, "This is a hold-up. For good measure, he added, "Hurry up, because robbing banks is a tough way to make a living." People weren't sure how to take these remarks. Was the robber trying to be funny or issuing a threat? Regardless of his motivation, everyone tried to stay calm. According to Lamb, everything was dead quiet inside the bank. One staffer did have the presence of mind to activate the silent alarm, alerting police that a holdup was in progress. Smith ordered the tellers to empty their tills and place the cash in his haversack bags. Martins instructed the tellers to do as they were told and hand over the money from their tills. As tellers stuffed cash inside the bags, Smith said, "I'm not satisfied with the till money. I want all you have." This meant accessing the vault and the money inside. Opening the bank vault, however, required the actions of 3 people: Martins, Accountant Lamb, and First Teller Joan Hoffman. Lamb had the combination for the outer vault door, but only Hoffman had the combination for the inner vault door. Martins explained the situation to Smith, who kept glancing out the windows to see if police were coming. "Just do what's necessary," said Smith. Martins, Lamb, and Hoffman opened the doors to the bank vault. A padlocked metal money box was removed from the vault and carried by Hoffman and Martins back into the main part of the bank. The money box was roughly 18 inches long, a foot wide, and maybe 10 inches high. It was placed on a counter. Smith was informed that bank staff needed to find the keys to open the padlocks. He was fine with this, and staff rushed to locate the appropriate keys. Most witnesses say Smith was calm and collected during the holdup. They also noticed how thin he was and how pale his arms were. The keys were located and used to open a pair of padlocks on the money box. The contents of the box were emptied into the haversacks. "Just put in $100,000, that'll do," said Smith. Once he was satisfied with the amount of cash gathered, Smith announced that female customers could leave. He ordered them to exit the bank, then head north in the parking lot. "I've never killed a lady yet, and I don't want to start now," remarked Smith. Male customers were told to leave next. After the men departed, Smith said female bank staff could leave. Hoffman paused to grab her handbag on the way out. "I told him I was going to take my cigarettes, that I needed a smoke," Hoffman recalled in court. Smith let her take her smokes, telling her, "You're very calm, lady." Smith's haversacks bulged with $25,361.50 in cash. The sacks had straps on the top. Smith put his left forearm through the straps of both bags, balancing them like a shopper carrying groceries. He held the rifle in his other hand. It was now time for male bank staff to exit, said Smith. The men were told to leave through the front door, then head west toward a nearby public school. Smith stepped out and walked in the opposite direction, toward the Ford Galaxy parked a block away. He left the guitar case in the bank. A crowd had gathered in the Bathurst Manor Plaza parking lot, drawn by the sound of gunfire and commotion in the bank. The crowd parted as bank staff and patrons moved through their ranks. Onlookers gawked when Smith appeared, rifle in hand, but gave him a wide berth. Smith glanced behind him a few times as he moved. Sally Blank reconnected with her husband, who was enraged. Jack Blank, wearing a red sports shirt, slacks, tan socks, and black Oxford shoes, was in a fighting mood. Everyone was standing there. My husband was like, "Where are the police? Why aren't they here? What's going on? Why are they taking so long? Don't let that man get away," Sally Blank told CBC-TV. Lipovsky would testify to much the same in a courtroom, although it was clear Blank's actions were making him nervous. "When we were out in the parking lot, Mr. Blank was building himself up, yelling, 'Let's go after him. There's enough of us to take him. There's only one of them. Why should we let him get away?' And this continued. Then he started to yell that he was a crack shot and someone get him a gun. By this point other people were yelling, 'He is a crack shot. Someone get him a gun,' said Lipovsky in court. Lipovsky did not think this was a good idea. Myself and several other customers of the bank asked Blank to mind his own business, that the bank was insured. There was no reason for anyone to jeopardize their own lives. The police were on their way. It was up to them, and they were trained to handle bank robbers, said Lepovsky in the same CBC program that featured Ms. Blank. To do nothing but wait was intolerable, however, for an incorrigible warrior such as Blank, said Alan Purley, president of the General Wingate branch of the Royal Canadian Legion, which the furrier belonged to, during a subsequent television interview. On the witness stand, Sally Blank admitted that her husband was quite a character for discipline. Maybe he was too much that way, I don't know, but I guess he was not a sergeant in the Army for nothing. Martins walked across the plaza parking lot, then took cover behind some vehicles. Lamb hurried to his 1964 white Comet sedan parked outside the bank. When the bandit went away, I leaped into my car and I was going to follow him, but before I got out of the parking lot, someone else pulled in on an angle and blocked me, so I went back to the bank and got my gun, states Lamb. At the time, banks in Canada routinely stocked pistols and expected staff to use these weapons in case they were robbed. Smith knew this. When he had pulled one of his earlier armed robberies at a Toronto area bank in 1960, an enraged bank manager had fired a few shots at him as he sped off in the getaway car. Those shots missed, but he might not always be so lucky. The CIBC branch kept a pair of .38 caliber Enfield revolvers handy. One of them was in Lamb's desk, the other in the manager's desk. Lamb charged into the bank, snatched the revolver from his desk drawer, and started turning the cylinder. The pistols each had 6 chambers, but for safety reasons, Lamb kept only 4 loaded. The cylinders were positioned so the hammer would hit an empty chamber if one of the revolvers should fall to the floor. Underloading a revolver to prevent an accidental discharge was an old trick that detectives practiced when carrying a 6-gun in a shoulder holster, but Lamb didn't know that. What he did know, however, was that a colleague at another bank had been killed in a freak accident involving a fully loaded handgun. The bank employee was transporting a basket with a revolver on top when the weapon fell off. The pistol hit the floor, and the hammer hit a live round. The 6-shooter fired, killing the unlucky employee. After that, Lamb made sure to keep 2 chambers empty in both revolvers at his CIBC branch. Cocking the hammer would bring a round into the firing position. Pistol in hand, Lamb hurried out of the bank and was approached by a furious Blank. "What are you all standing there for? Why aren't the police here? Why don't you do something about it? You've all got guns," snapped the angry Army veteran. He grabbed the gun and yelled, "I'm a crack shot. Give me that gun." I struggled with him over it to the point where I thought one of us was going to get killed, so I let go of the gun, recalls Lamb. Sally Blank offered a slightly different narrative, understandable given the situation and the fact adrenaline was running high in everyone. According to Sally Blank, Lamb didn't have a pistol at the ready, but offered to get one for Blank after he expressed his expertise in firearms. In her recollection, Lamb, or another bank employee, raced back to the bank with Blank in tow to fetch a weapon. "I said, please don't do it. Don't do this because my husband will be killed," I said. "Don't give him a gun, please." And he didn't listen to me. Never answered me or even looked at me, she testified in court. Multiple witnesses, however, heard Jack Blank bellowing about being a crack shot and demanding the revolver. There is some discrepancy about Sally Blank's reaction. Some people said she begged bank staff not to give Blank a gun. Other witnesses, including liquor store manager Harry Caesar, corroborated Lamb's account. Mr. Blank started to wrestle with Lamb and took the gun from him. I heard the accountant say to Mr. Blank, "Cock the gun before you shoot it," and then Mr. Blank started to run, Caesar told a courtroom. Stan Lesk recounts much the same. 14 years old that summer, Lesk lived with his parents in the Bathurst Manor neighborhood. The Lesk family were planning to spend that weekend at Stan's sister's cottage in Gravenhurst, Ontario.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?